Good evening. Good evening. It's so nice to see everyone. This is marvelous. Beautiful evening on Conneaut Lake. All you wonderful people, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. I can promise you that you won't be disappointed. However, there has been a change in the program. Alec can't make it. I will be playing some popular show tunes. Sincerity, though, Alec is a marvelous gentleman. I think most of you are familiar with his resume. I won't belabor it too much. He is one of the finest pianists in the world. We are so fortunate to have him here. His bio is on the back of that program, and it's just extensive. And he is one of the, I think, one of the few Steinway artists in the world. We were able to procure this beautiful, fantastic instrument because he is considered one of the foremost Steinway pianists in the world. He's going to play tonight some, I think, Chopin and Debussy, if I'm even saying those correctly. And he, as we know, he will also intersperse some of his comments and his wonderful, hilarious personality into the program as well. So without further ado, I give you Alec Chien.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for coming. I want to thank the Bush Investment for putting me up again. Last year, when I did this, I did talk. This year, I'm talking again, but both times, you have to understand, I'm like a fish out of water. I usually just play and don't talk. But there have been some people who tried to persuade me that when I talk, it actually can be enjoyable. But it depends on what I talk about, of course. What I do plan to do is to show tonight some of the music, what actually happens, and through that, when we all learn to pay attention and listen, maybe we can also together learn to be better listeners. The program that you have and the invite has a little article that appeared in the Tribune, which I think would facilitate that presentation about the idea of listening. And if you haven't had a chance to read it, you can do so afterwards, and it should still make sense. Now, today, what I want to show us, first of all, is the first two pieces. Music is all about really creating a mood or character, and certainly portraying messages. And for the longest time, I really had a hard time with that myself, because it is so subjective to the listener. And it also really, for the most part, what I deal with doesn't have to do with text. So when you hear a Chopin ballade, we may get the impressions and the moods, but the actual message, I have always had a hard time. But what I really realized is this. When we really pay attention to it, there's a lot in it. Now, in classical music, if you are familiar with going to classical music venues, and the environment is usually quiet. Whereas many other art forms, music, you don't need to be quiet. Jazz is not requiring for you to be quiet. Certainly rock, tons of mics. I actually can't even hear my own heart sometimes when it's loud. But the classical music is just the opposite. And there are many reasons. There really are. I would just cite one tonight, and that is, in terms of classical music, many people call it serious music, which is not to insult the other form of music being not serious. What they mean is, when the composer wants a certain thing, certain notes, certain messages, he or she writes them down and the performer does them. Sometimes there's improvisational involved, but for the most part, it is not like jazz, which really bases on that. Now, tonight, the first two pieces that I played for you, let's just talk briefly about the mood, the character, okay? The first one, the ballade, is certainly very dramatic, many melancholy parts, certainly very tender, explosive in anger, certainly passionate, and quite compact, muscular. The second piece, just the other extreme, really. Very pleasant, very festive, certainly coy, flirtatious, colorful, tons of things that captures your attention. Many gradations of colors. Now that's the mood overall, but I also want to show us via music elements what actually are happening with musical elements. By that I mean this. Basically any form of music, I don't care whether it's reggae, classical, jazz, rock, acid, what have you, you basically are dealing with thematic, or sometimes people call it melody, or phrase, or sentence. It's the same thing. And harmonic, and rhythmic. And if it is vocal, you have the text. So those would be the four. Let me just quickly show you what I mean by thematic or phrase, or sentence. Obviously, with the ballade, the opening right, and then later on you heard something like this. It's very hard for me to not play the harmony. Okay, this. You may recall that. By the way, that theme comes back later on very passionately. And then later on, very passionate. So it happens several times, and then this happens several times. In the middle, different key, but the same idea the last time. Very mysterious. I on purpose blurred a lot of things, only to explode to the end. Now, that's the thematic element. Harmonic element. Harmony would be when you have more than one note that's being played or sung at the same time. It is really that simple. Do you have harmony here? The answer is yes. Do you have harmony here? The answer is yes. All right. Do you have harmony here? The answer is yes. With some people, anyway, it's more. But anyway, the point is, it is happening at the same time. Whereas melodic is usually, I would call it horizontal, harmonic would be vertical. Now, in the harmonic sense, many times you also have what they call the implied harmony, meaning using or banking on your memory, you as a listener fill in what has been played in the melody, even if it is one note at a time. For example, this. The horizontal element would be, that's the opening of the ballade. Notice it was done what they call in unison. It's the same note. So the forcefulness of it, the agreement of it, also propels to you a strong, condemning, maybe even statement. But the harmonic that is implied, the harmony, is this. See it? That is an implied harmony situation. You heard those notes. Your mental awareness might not even be acute, but you heard it and you remembered it somehow. In fact, that's how we understand sentences. I would say, how are you? Well, you understood that because it was actually a linear expression, experience. I didn't say, how are you at the same time. Let's try that. You say how, you say are, I say you. Ready? You. All right. We'll rehearse this. Ready? Do you remember what you need to say?
How?
You. Okay, ready? You.
How.
That would be harmony. I didn't say harmonious, but the point is, when we say how are you, it banked on your memory of what was said before, although you heard one word at a time. To be ridiculous, if you say how today, and on October 4th you say are, and then next April 15th before tax, I say you, and we seem to know what we're doing, you would want to send us to some asylum or something. There's something wrong. Why? Because that got exaggerated to a point where there's no contextual sense anymore. Okay? So the harmonic aspect of it is implied by this. In fact, the ballade is in G minor. You don't have to know what that means. The point is, Chopin did not start there. It is a very far away chord that eventually found its way to G minor. So what we heard was something like this. Finally resolved. And then now the beginning of the message, and he found G minor. Now, do you remember that? If I give the right rhythm. That was the end of that work. He brought back that resolution, that harmonic progression, several times. That is a way of framing the unity of it. There are many occasions like that. Now, the thing of it is, when you go from this, or this, is the smallest distance in Western music. We call it the half step. Now, that half step is amazing. Because that half step is the smallest in Western music, a lot of composers can really, really make you yearn and churn inside for a lot of stuff. Chopin did this at the beginning. Same thing. So that is your half step. Same with this. Now, the half step finds its way all the way through. You may recall something like this. I can't talk peg. Second time. He goes one step further. Ah. He found a new key. And all of a sudden you have this gorgeous second theme. Now, notice also, with that in mind, prior to that, nothing was really, quote, linked so much. For example, now listen to the bass, the bottom. I'll exaggerate. The first is more than the second, then there's the rest. It's a throb with the rest. Those 6 beats are there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I could be more introspective this time. A lot of throbbing underneath. Now, those 6 notes, when it got to this beautiful second theme, they're still there, but they're now all linked. Listen to the bottom. So to destroy it, I could do it like the opening. Really destroying it. But that's the point. Chopin intended for that to collectively give you that beautiful change of mood. Notice at the very end, too, when you have these 2 steps. Oh, that actually sounds like the Mozart Symphony. Anyway, these things happen. So when you have all these half steps, it also brings something else into the picture. And that is, you may have heard of major and minor scales. All right? They're basically diatonic scale. The tonic is the root, it's your home. Diatonic, there are 2. So we basically are dealing with either a whole step, meaning 2 halves, or half steps. Depending on the placement of those half steps, you have a scale of an octave, say, let's say 8 notes. You have 7 intervals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Depending on where those half steps are, you have either major or minor. And so this would be major. That's your half step. It's your half step. Minor. Your half step is here. So depending on, now you know where it begins. You know this is your home note tonic, because they are either half step or whole step, depending on where they are. However, if every step is a half step, what do you now have? They call it chromatic scale. The point is, you don't know where it begins. I could do this. You don't know what it is. You can do that with a major scale too. I know that. You don't end on the tonic, but you still know it is major because of those half step, whole steps pattern. But here, when you have nothing but half step, it is all equal, chromatic. Now, notice what Chopin did. Do you recall at the very end, after the last shout? Really shouting. Those are chromatic scales, the first half opposing each other. Down, up. They go together. Now, the idea of half-step scale or chromatic scales creates something very interesting. Because in the diatonic situation where you have a tonic, you have ownership. You are in G major, you own G. You want E major, you own E. Whereas in a chromatic scale, there's no ownership. Or, better yet, they're all equal say. Are you familiar with that philosophy? Beethoven loved that. He was such a democratic kind of guy. Yeah, people wrote senior projects, doctoral dissertations on that, on the idea of democracy, equal distance of all steps. So that's just a little hint of what we may have heard. And I tried to tell you the mood, tried to tell you the musical elements, and then together the music elements making up that mood. Now, the next two pieces that I'm playing came from someone saying from last year they kind of wish that I play something more famous or, really well known. So I went into my inventory and typed in famous. Anyway, the Moonlight Sonata, you have heard that somewhere. And of course, Clair de Lune, many of you have heard that. The Moonlight Sonata is Beethoven, and Clair de Lune is Debussy. Interestingly, they're both about moonlights. Interestingly, on the piano, they basically are on the same note. Granted, one is C sharp, the other is D flat. But I don't want to say any more. Just want to play them. And then after that, I want to ask some questions about these two things. I will say one thing first. They are both quiet pieces. Okay? They are. When we really want to listen, we really need to be quiet. When we are always like this, no wonder, right? Or if you're like me, I can't wait till someone finishes your sentence. That's bad, right? So, both of these, I'm taking them from bigger works, really. This is one movement from the Moonlight Sonata, and one movement from the Bergamasque Suite by Debussy. What are the differences? The Beethoven, the Debussy. Now, the Beethoven, they're both obviously very quiet. The Beethoven had melodic interests and certainly significant say within the harmonic inner parts. What I mean by that is this. This. How's it go? I don't remember. Oh, okay. Oh, here we go. So it's a harmonic progression. I could have done this. Same thing. Now, the melody, even though it does have one, it really is not great. It basically is, right? And so, finally has some resolution. And then, by the way, I felt like I played it too slow. But anyway, I really did. But once you start, that's it. You're stuck with it. The reason is this. I can give myself a lesson right now. The reason is Beethoven said in half time, meaning 2 half notes per measure. And it is the half note that is very slow. So with my pace, it was almost like a funeral march, you know. That would be like 1, 2, sorry. 1, 2, that's very slow. 1, 2, it has more flow. Anyway, now the Debussy is even lighter and feathery. I don't know for those who saw it, I approached the keyboard very differently. The Beethoven I pressed far deeper, and the Debussy, because this is a beautiful piano, and it is very sensitive. Gradations of color. And then at the very end, I could really wait, and then so I could do a lot of things with that, with colors. Debussy was very much about that. He did not want to develop things. Beethoven was all about developing. So with those two in mind, because they were both quiet, I thought it could introduce the idea of us needing to be quiet. Let me explain. Both of these pieces are quiet pieces. And we usually, in the classical music environment, have a quiet surrounding. Those are external. Internally, I find myself usually unable to have a quiet heart. Because I think to learn to listen, I need to really not even have an agenda to begin with. Many of you, when you came tonight, you knew I was playing. Many of you might even know some of those pieces, but you really didn't have preconceived notion as to what Beethoven or Mozart, Chopin or Debussy was saying necessarily. You heard it through my interpretation and so on, but you yourself didn't have a preconceived notion necessarily. Usually when I listen to someone, even if I'm really paying attention, I'm making all sorts of, I think that's what they're going to say, or I think what so-and-so might want to imply. No, I really realize that for me to be a good listener, I just have to let them say and let them talk. Now, when we are listening with a quiet heart, all of a sudden you'll be amazed how the center of attention is not on me. It's on the person who's speaking. Okay? After the intermission, I will come back and just play a movement from Schubert's last piano sonatas. Maybe I'll tell you now. I was going to tell you after I played. He was dying from syphilis. He had it for 6, 7, 8 years. And near the end of his life, he wrote 3 mammoth piano sonatas. His last 3 works were his last 3 piano sonatas. Now, there's debate whether he knew he was dying or not. It continues, the debate. But to me, it almost doesn't matter whether he knew or not, because the music was certainly very much of someone who is resigned, someone who feels the beauty of the art, but is not struggling. This movement that I will play after intermission is the slow movement of his very last sonata. And if you do the repeats, that sonata is mammoth. It's like 50 minutes. This movement, I will just let it speak to you. Okay? And then afterwards, I want to bring our attention to why and how it is that is so important for all of us. I tell myself to need to learn to listen, because I think it's prime time. I will say more after the Schubert. So stretch a little bit. I will go in and somebody will come and tell me I'll come back with the Schubert. Okay? Thanks. does death grab us? Whether he was really aware of his own death or mortality, like I said, is not worth the debate. Where is that other mic? I shouldn't walk around. It is true when it is about the death, our own mortality or people's. People pay attention much more. Often, eulogies and things like that are made after the person is dead. But when we really long for is to be heard, whether we had a, quote, successful life or not. Now, when it comes to death, because it catches our attention, or at least the topic of it, I would like to just expand a couple of points on that. The Pennsylvania Youth Survey, also known as PAYS, P-A-Y-S, they now have, it's a survey of students, many great questions, and those who answered, they just collect the data. And one spot that has hit quite a few of us in terms of being such a heartbroken thing is in the Crawford area here. A very large majority of those who answered said their life is really not worth listening. These are maybe 6th, 8th, 10th, 12th graders. Some actually contemplated on suicide, some actually succeeded, but it's a very shockingly high number, very high percentage. Is it because they just haven't felt they have been valued? Is it because also people don't seem to care? You have heard, I'm sure, of bullying. What about the bulliers? They're just trying to, I think, get attention. They go about it that way. Just even today, some of you may have seen it actually, there's a news clip just today about a baseball umpire. Okay? He was on his way, Pittsburgh, yeah. He was on his way to do a game between the Pirates and I think Tampa Bay, when he saw a woman on the Roberto Clemente Bridge. And he just caught his attention, and he went and realized that she was about to jump. He caught her, but it was not, easy because she was already on the other side of the railing, I think. And pretty soon other people came and helped him, and they were able to pull it back to safety. But there was one thing that caught my attention from that, because after they put her back to safety immediately, he went up to talk to her. Guess what her first thing she said was? She said, after this, you're just going to forget about me. That was what she said. That was the first thing she said. It was unplanned. And of course the umpire said, no, I will never forget this, forget you. But that's not even the issue. She probably have been, throughout her life, even for those who may have cared, didn't sustain, well, for whatever her reasons are. The point is, I think, it roots back to, and this is, by the way, autobiographical. I didn't, and I still don't, really know how to learn to be a great listener. It really does take a lifelong training. It takes the inner heart to be quiet. Obviously, distractions galore. Okay? Now, so when we have something with this Schubert movement, what really was poignant, I thought, was not only beauty, but the fact that there are so many details all point to a basic resigned attitude, as if, wow, you know. But you can be very resigned and still have beautiful things coming out. There was no struggle. Now, of course, it has to do with the personality. Beethoven would struggle all the way to the end, and he did. So I just wanted to bring that idea to us tonight with the idea of, hey, the article included in the program did also mention there are great things happening here. I think it's very right. It starts with a lot of us learning to listen, to value. You know, a very wise man once said, you don't give someone dignity. You don't give someone dignity, you affirm it. So it is possible many of these people probably perhaps felt they have been robbed of their dignity. I think the mics are conflicting. So without further conflicting, the last piece on the program before we have some Q&A time. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to analyze it to death. Just let it happen. It is very profound. He wrote 4 ballades, and this is the last one. And it has a mixture of very deep emotion. So hope you enjoy the last ballade by Schubert. You're very kind. For those of you who may have some questions, this is a question and answer time. I hope I have answers. If you don't mind, I need to show how old I am. I want to see you better. Whoops. Don't worry about it. I left my glasses in the back. That's another sign.
You're showing how old you are.
I know. I just made a spectacle of myself. But anyway.
We're getting punished.
It was a perfect setup. Any questions? Yes?
When we hear classical music, these composers are old. I mean, they have history. Are there any new guys coming up that are?
Yes. Who has heard of Philip Glass?
Yes.
I really love his music. The answer is yes. But you know, many times it takes time to sift. Schubert was not that well known. Beethoven was. Bach took a long time. He didn't know, he passed on. It was Mendelssohn who brought Bach back to, So many times it takes a long time. Many times, especially people like Beethoven, Debussy, they were so far ahead of their time. People didn't understand them. In fact, yes, he was a pain in the neck. He moved something like 57 times in 3 years or something like that. I mean, I don't know that. Don't Google me. Yeah. But the point is, he couldn't, Many times when we're really not understood, we get very angry. Because he was so far ahead of his time, he knew people didn't understand him. He knew. He was pretty sure of himself, too. But anyone else? Hi. Maybe somebody can repeat your sentence, or maybe I can bring the mic to you. I like your tie. All three of you.
Yeah.
How old were you when you started practicing?
Okay, he said, how old was I when I started practicing? The key word, pun intended, was practicing. I started piano when I was 7, did not want to practice, did not know what I wanted. Not until I was pretty close to junior in high school. I wanted to, but didn't know how. The teacher I had at Juilliard she was very temperamental, very tempestuous. Many people didn't like her, but she was one of the greatest talents I have ever met. And yes, she was impatient, but the point is, I learned a lot from her. She really taught me how to work, the craft of working. So, how long have I been practicing? Since I was practicing junior in high school, but I started when I was 7. So, yes?
How old were you when you went to Juilliard?
18, after high school. Yes?
You could be living anywhere. Why did you choose to be in Meadville?
Well, if I look at what happened, I would say when I was young, I did a lot of things without really thinking through, and I don't mean I would not have had I thought it through. I don't mean that. But things just happened. And so when I landed the position at Allegheny, actually I was about to embark upon a concert tour to China. And I was finishing my doctoral dissertation at the same time. And all of a sudden my manager said, hey, okay, I'm backing up. It was this Juilliard teacher. She said, Alec, I'm going to tell you something, I don't want you to be insulted. Because many people think as soon as you start performing, can't talk. As soon as you start teaching, you don't play anymore. She said, that's not true. She said, I see in you a very gifted direction to teach. So please look into that, be a teaching performer, that kind of thing. So my manager said, hey, did you know there was an opening at Allegheny College? So I just sent in my resume, and I was the last one to apply, chronologically. I was told that, like over 300 applicants out of the date of the deadline. I called, and the secretary said, well, if you send it in, it will be postmarked today. 3 days later, they called, we've sorted down to 25, are you still interested? I just sent it in, of course. Then when we narrowed down to 10, we were still asked 3, so I came to interview, Then next thing I knew, I was on my way to finishing the dissertation, and then concert tour, came back, and I was here, But many times, I'm really, throughout the years as I grew and learned, 2 things. One is, if I had the impression that I deserved better, that's a dangerous thing. Because it isn't like better. Meadville is a beautiful place. It doesn't have some of the things that most people think are advantageous. I know that. But Meadville, I met my wife here. But, some of you may know I'm a Christian. And so I have given my life to Jesus Christ. One of the things is that I know that he has told us to be wherever I am. I'm not part of the community, I am the community. So wherever I am, he can use me for his reason. And so the thing is, there were other opportunities that came, and I didn't take them. In fact, this is ironic. Our middle daughter, Michaela, is here with her husband, Joel. They just moved here from Dallas. She went to Baylor University, met him at Baylor University, and he loved the concept of the Meadville Neighborhood Center that I was told you about. So they moved here. But the irony of it is, I actually had an offer to go to Baylor University. And I didn't go. I forgot why. It's a long time ago. I actually went and I was one of the, I actually went and played for them and so on. So I came back. I don't know if that answered your question. It probably didn't.
Hey, Alec.
Yes? Okay.
Of all the composers, obviously you've played a lot of different composers. If you were to pick one that you would say, this is the best, and why would you pick that composer?
Usually when I play, I would like that composer, the piece by that composer to be my favorite at that time. But that sounds so, yeah, come on. But it really, I do try that, and I don't succeed all the time. Overall, when it, I also went through periods of time when I focused on one composer at a time. I did that. I went through a Schumann phase, went through a Scriabin phase, went through a Chopin phase, went through a Beethoven phase. Beethoven probably is the answer. Why? Perhaps the most comprehensive and most in touch with humanity. But even that is just try to come up with some reasons. The real reason, I just loved it. Loved his music. I did play all the 32 sonatas at Allegheny and so on, and like a 7-concert series. Afterwards, my understanding of Chopin and Schumann and Rachmaninoff grew because I spent that kind of time on Beethoven. Now, go explain that. I can't explain that. So, Beethoven. Anyone else? Yes.
Can you speak more about your neighborhood project?
Yes, the Meadville Neighborhood Center is it's a neat thing. When I took the early retirement from Allegheny, And a month later, I was involved with this. Basically, it is not a location. It is a concept of trying to engage the community to be connected. We try to be a catalyst to make connections between entities that already exist. Of course, there are perhaps new directions as well. So when we try to make connections, what happens is you begin to see duplications and you begin to see holes. One of the reasons I was able to talk about the pace has to do with the fact that I was have been involved with the neighborhood center, and there's a lot of community people I got to meet. There's a lot of energy in this town, very positive energy of well-meaning people who donate their time to make this a better community. And one of those things has to do with the fact that you may have heard of the Big Zipper, you may have heard of other things. Meadville Neighborhood Center sponsors some of those things, provide insurance, but we are not in the forefront all the time, like in your face. It's not about the neighborhood center. It's about the community. In fact, some of the times when we talk about we, I have to remind myself, which we do I mean? The we ought to be the whole community. If you are a social media person, go to Facebook, type in Meadville Neighborhood Center. There's so much there. There are quite a few people involved in that who are in this room now. After this, talk to them. You don't know who they are. But you can just do that. Hey, do you know anything about Meadville? Just one at a time. I'm afraid if I point someone out, I'll miss somebody else, And those who are involved, find people. You know what it's all about. I will share two more with you. These are free, they're not printed. A Chopin etude, and it's a study on beautiful harmonies. Chopin gives you a rhythm that's constant, so that's no longer a factor. The thematic grows out of the harmony, but it's the harmony that is just, beautiful. And then I'll end, being a ham, tonight with a Chopin Polonaise. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.